Yeah,
Um,
and you and I can relate enormously over that whole, like, generational patterns, just kind of seeing those that healing that is needed to do, right? Like, that there are these wounds that happen, and there's this healing that we can do, and we can do this some transformation for our children, we can do a little heavy lifting as far as healing some of that stuff so that our children don't necessarily have to do that, um, which I
yeah.
love.
Yeah, and I also think, like, we are expected sometimes, like, "Oh my gosh, now that I know that this pattern exists, now that I know that I
Mm,
have this intergenerational, trauma factor, and now that I'm reconnecting to my body," I have found that in a lot of the groups that I do, people feel a lot of pressure, like, "Oh my gosh, I
mm,
have to heal this, I have to make sure that I do it differently so that
mhm,
I don't mess up my kids, I don't wanna
mhm,
mess up my kids."
mhm,
And so I have to stop the group sometimes and say, let's just acknowledge the fact that that's a really heavy burden on our shoulders to feel like we have to heal our entire lineage. I don't want anyone to ever feel that pressure because pressure creates stress sometimes, and stress
mhm.
creates the opposite of what we want to create in our families.
Yeah.
So, I really invite people to be very gentle with themselves and to say, I'm going to do what is in my capacity to do. Um, Day to day, moment to moment. And some days are the weight of the world is going to be on my shoulders. And on those days, it's going to be okay to rest and really reclaim that rest, and not feel like I have to heal, all of the 7 generations before me and then all 7 generations in front of me, because we're human. We're human, and this experience should be enjoyed as much as possible too.
What I wanna know is, like, how did you start to remother yourself? Where did you start? Because we can start with we start with the body, we start with the mind, we start to look at our needs. What were some of the like, kinda beliefs that you had to unpack that you didn't even realize that you had there? Like, there was the one, right? Like, that child needs a spanking, right? Like,
Yeah.
what else did you discover and have to unpack?
Yeah, I think there were quite a few things, and I really want to give a shout out to one of my mentors. Her name is Sylvia Poero, who was trained under a woman named Margaret Paul, who practices inner bonding. From the time my daughter was about 1, I started seeing Sylvia and doing this inner child work and really recognizing the fact that I still held a lot of emotion and a lot of somatic experience even about what had happened to me as a child.
I'm just gonna
Um,
pause you right here because I wanna just define somatic experience for the
yes,
listener who may not know. So, would
yeah,
you?
it's sensation, it's a sensation in your body. It's acknowledging where it is you are feeling any tension, and then when you move into kind of like transforming it, where can you relax? Where can you release that tension? So it's not as like academic, like I think all of us have access to this. Um, so body sensations, when I felt tight, when I felt contraction in my body and I didn't know where that came from. I think the process of remothering myself and really introducing this concept into my life allowed me to not judge those experiences, not become angry with myself for having had a negative response or a negative reaction to something. And so it began with this release of judgment about my experience. I felt like when I was experiencing triggers, and I want to be really mindful about this word too, because it was brought up to me not that long ago that the word triggers can actually bring up some negative emotions for people that are victims of gun violence. And
Oh,
so now I tend to call them activations more often than not.
hmm.
And so when I feel these activations, there's something deeper, there's something deeper, and reconnecting with the child that is within me that's afraid, um, either of being hurt or being abandoned, or, is not receiving that respect, right? As a child, I did not receive a lot of respect. And so whenever I feel disrespected, air quotes around disrespected, I may become very activated, right? Because it is that inner child woundedness that is responding. And so really envisioning my inner child, either by having like a framed photograph of myself as a child, by connecting with like my old doll, which sounds very weird for people, but like it really does help to have this like visual, concrete idea of our inner child. Um, so I think, that's been really powerful for me. And then acknowledging that I can be my own mother. Like I have access to my inner mother. And this is like the work of Bethany Webster and then also inner bonding. But the inner mothering and becoming my own mother and actively speaking with my inner child and saying, I got you, you are safe. What is it that you need right now? Like, let's tend to your needs, and not in a way that I'm going to be really permissive about my inner child's needs, right? Like if my inner child is saying, I really want to shout at my husband right now, like I really want to shout at him and like, hurt him. I want to like whack him with the spatula. That's not necessarily like the true need underneath, right? And so sometimes because we don't have the alternative, what I have learned is that our inner mother also needs support, and that support comes from guidance. That support comes from a connection to something bigger than ourselves. Some people could call it spirit or source. I call it my future grandmother self, my future abuelita self. And so bringing in this idea of how do I move through this in a way that is in alignment with the way that I ultimately want to be, and how do I ultimately want to show up? And this is why I love the idea of your future grandmother self or your future abuelita self, because if we become open to that, I really feel like we can receive that guidance. And that may seem kind of woo-woo for some of your listeners, like, but
But that's
I
like a voice inside you, just like your inner
yes,
child is a voice inside you, right? That
yes.
sort of future wise version of you is also a version that's inside of you.
Absolutely. And I fully believe that, we have access to it. I have access to my inner mother. I have access to my future abuelita self. I have access to my inner niña, my inner child, who I call my inner niña. But I also have access to all of the beautiful things that the earth provides. I have access to Mother Earth. That's another mother of mine. What are the elements that I can bring into my life that really help me feel grounded and help me remember what is truly valuable? You know,
Yeah.
is it
Mhm.
valuable that, my child be sitting and distance learning for a ridiculous amount of time? Or, is it more valuable to kind of go out and do some grounding by our tree in the backyard? Like let's figure out how we can bring in the resources of the earth, who have supported us forever, and who actually reconnect us to our ancestors too, because that's what they were in tune with. And so it is, again, like it goes back to that reclaiming. This is not anything new. I don't think that thinking about ourselves as children, who have these beautiful innocent spirits and essences, like that's nothing new. And so I think the framework of the inner mothering and the inner child work and the remothering work from the time my daughter was really young has been totally transformative for me, and it actually frees my own mom, and it frees my partner, and it frees everybody else who I am not responsible for. I'm not responsible for my mother's inner child. I'm not responsible for my partner's inner child. I'm only responsible for mine. So what are the things that I can do to make sure that I'm, responsive to my own inner child? And in doing that, it allows me to be responsive to my outer children.
Catch new episodes of the Mindful Mama podcast and other free resources, including the Mindful Mom Guide at mindfulmamamentor.com. You can listen to every back catalog episode, including interviews with Dr. Dan Siegel, Janla Van Zant, Sharon Salzberg, and get meditations, join our private Facebook group, and more. Go to mindfulmamamentor.com now. I'll see you there.